Sometimes we must live through the darkness in order to see the light. We must visualize.
Hey everyone, it's Diane again. Hope you liked my intro video. It's very short and very simple. If anyone knows how to do a better one than that and is willing to help me out, let me know. This week I decided I would talk about how I was diagnosed with Diamond-Black Fan Anemia. I had to speak to my mom about this because I was a baby and I don't remember any of it. So I called my mom in Canada this morning. I'm in Australia, and she told me how she remembers me being diagnosed. I was born in '84 in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, and that's a very small town if anyone's even ever heard of it, and you know, a funny name. So my mom tells me that I was a very fussy baby and that I never slept and I cried a lot and they didn't know why. She said I got sick quite a bit, and she and the doctors started to know each other quite well. When I was about 6 months old, she said, all right, got an infection, and so I was on antibiotics, which didn't do anything. So my mom took me back to the doctor. They did emergency blood work, and my hemoglobin was at 70, and if anyone knows what a hemoglobin is, that's pretty much your red blood cells. So normal for a woman, or I know for a woman it's 120, I'm not sure for a child, but 70 is quite low. And so they suspected that it was low iron and it was a dietary issue. So my mom thought it was an allergy thing as well, so she took me off of regular milk and put me on goat's milk, and nothing was working. My hemoglobin just kept dropping. I was in the hospital about 4 times in Moose Jaw. I had a very low appetite at the time, and my mom remembers coming back one night after she went out and I was in the hospital, and she found a nurse force feeding me, and that was very upsetting to her. My mom had a few interesting experiences with nurses throughout my life, and it's quite funny. And my mom said I was screaming when she was trying to force feed me. My mom also said I was very small and I wasn't growing. And then I started to sleep a lot, and going from a really crying loud baby to somebody who slept a lot, that was very worrisome. We ended up seeing a pediatrician, and they sent us to Saskatoon, which is a bigger city in Saskatchewan, and we went and saw the head of the blood service, and the blood services and a hematologist. So I'm reading off of notes here, so it's a bit awkward. When I was in Saskatoon, they drew blood, and they had a really hard time drawing blood, and they couldn't get any, but finally that they were able to get a vein, and they decided to admit me for further testing. They ended up losing that first blood work and trying to do again, which again was almost impossible, but eventually they ended up having to use an artery to draw blood. And if you know anything about hemoglobin, having a low hemoglobin, it's already hard to draw blood, and they just ended up taking more blood out of me. Eventually, because of all the blood they were taking out of me and my hemoglobin kept dropping, I went into heart failure. Well, my mom was out at a movie with some friends who decided she needed a break, so took her out, and so my dad was the only one there with me. So mom didn't find out that I was going to heart failure until she came back from the movie. So they ended up giving me my first blood transfusion, and they didn't think I'd make it through the night. Think about it, obviously several times, I'm a cat with 9 lives. I've lost about 5 already, and I think I still have 4 to go. I've been near death several times. I ended up making it through the night, obviously, I'm still here, and I ended up getting another transfusion, and my mom remembers there's a man in the waiting room, and he was asked to actually donate blood because he was the same blood type as me, and apparently he drank a lot of coffee because my mom says I was really hyper after I had that blood transfusion. So the doctor in Saskatoon wasn't quite sure what was going on with me, so he ended up diagnosing me with pre-leukemia, which meant it was pretty much wait and see until I get cancer. My mom did not like this answer, and she decided to start working with a different doctor, who told us about a different doctor in Winnipeg, Manitoba, which is another province over. Wasn't sure what it was. We had to get permission from the provincial government to go to Winnipeg for a second opinion, and thankfully my grandfather, who we called Papa and really miss him, he was head of the health services in Saskatoon, so he was able to make a phone call, and overnight we got permission to go to Winnipeg for a second opinion. So my mom and my grandmother, Noni, drove to Winnipeg, and we stayed at the Ronald McDonald House, which an amazing place. So if anyone else has stayed there, let me know. I don't remember it at all, but I just know it's such an amazing organization that helps families have somewhere to stay when their child is sick. So we ended up, I was about 13 months old at this time. Everything before that, I was about 6 months to a year old. And when we went to Winnipeg, I was about 13 months old, so just after a year. And there was one new doctor there who was a fellow. He took one look at me, and he came from Minnesota, and he saw another child with similar features and similar symptoms. He said, oh, this girl has Diamond-Blackfan anemia. At the time, it was called Blackfan-Diamond anemia syndrome, which they've changed around. DBA is a lot shorter, easier to say. So they said, like this girl, this baby, she's got deep set eyes, she's got a low forehead, and just other facial features that a lot of DBA patients have, and all these other symptoms show that she could have DBA. And my grandmother, my noni, looked and she's like, you just described my whole family. If you've seen pictures of my sisters or anything, I look exactly like them, and we've all got deep set eyes, don't really have a forehead, and that's just our family look, but it's also a very common look in the DBA patients. It's really interesting. I look on the DBA Foundation website and I find a lot of similarities in the facial features, which is kind of cool. They're not doing a bone marrow aspiration, which is how they test and find out DBA, and it was confirmed that I did have Diamond-Blackfan anemia. So they ended up doing another transfusion and then put me onto high dosages of prednisone, which is a steroid that is a medication that most patients or most people with Diamond-Blackfan anemia have, is they use this steroid prednisone, and it helps them produce red blood cells. So that's what I was on, really high dosage, and went back to home to Moose Jaw. And the doctor in Saskatoon that initially diagnosed me with pre-leukemia didn't accept that diagnosis that I had Diamond-Blackfan anemia, and he said the steroids would just mask the leukemia symptoms, so he was not happy with that. But the steroids were working, I was getting better, and so we ended up just going back and forth between Winnipeg and Moose Jaw in order to help me, or to see doctors and see specialists for that. We ended up moving to Winnipeg when I was about 4, so it was really good to be able to be closer to the specialists who knew of my disease, because many of you who have this disease know whenever you tell someone you have Diamond-Blackfan anemia, you get that blank stare and what's that sort of thing. So you have to go and explain that Diamond-Blackfan anemia essentially is you don't make red blood cells. So that's how I was diagnosed. I was a baby, went through several different doctors, and was eventually diagnosed and was put on steroids, which eventually I weaned down of. So next week I will talk about the first time I went to remission, which was a accidental remission on my part, being a young child. I also want to give a little facts about DBA. When I was born, there's some fact I remember, I don't know where it's from, but I believe there's only 10 patients in Canada with Diamond-Blackfan anemia when I was born, and now they say there's about 25 to 30 people diagnosed each year in Canada and the US. I live in Australia, and I believe that number is unknown. The oncologist I see here, he's like, I usually see DBA patients as children, don't know what happens to them after that. So if you live in Australia and have DBA, reach out to me. I do know of some families, but they live up in Sydney. Anyone in Melbourne, I'd be love to meet you. So yeah, next week I'll talk about the first time I'm in remission, and hopefully see you all then. Thanks.
Sometimes we must live through the darkness in order to see the light. We must visualize.